MacDonald died. Abbott resigned and died. Thompson died. Next up, Sir Mackenzie Bowell. How will things turn out for him? Mackenzie Bowell was born in Suffolk, England in 1823 and emigrated with his family to Belleville, present-day Ontario, when he was 9. Bowell apprenticed at the local newspaper, the Belleville Intelligencer, working as a printer's devil. He eventually became editor and co-owner with his brother-in-law, but after a bitter feud, Bowell ended up kicking him out and running it alone. Bowell was part of the Orange Order, a conservative Irish Protestant organization. At a young age, he became Grand Master of the Orange Order of British North America. Most politicians used the order as a stepping stone to advance their careers, but Bowell remained an Orangeman all his life. Bowell held some extreme positions. He hated Catholics and liberals and distrusted the French, and he wasn't shy about letting anybody know it. Bowell founded and served in the Belleville Rifle Company, reaching the rank of lieutenant colonel. He saw active duty several times, including guarding the border during the American Civil War and opposing the Fenian raids in 1866. In 1847, Bowell and Harriet Louise Moore got married after 5 years of dating. They had 9 children. Of the early prime ministers, Bowell is one of the few who still has many living descendants. Bowell was elected to the House of Commons as a Conservative MP in the Hastings North constituency in 1867. He would keep this riding for the next 25 years, never losing an election, even after the Pacific Scandal. Sir John A. Macdonald noticed this, and when the Conservatives came back into power in 1878, he appointed Bowell Minister of Customs, where he implemented the high tariffs of Macdonald's national policy. Macdonald didn't necessarily like Bowell, but keeping Bowell close kept extreme right-leaning voters happy. Bowell later served on Abbott and Thompson's cabinets, with portfolios including militia and defense and trade and commerce. In 1892, he left the House of Commons and became a senator. Thompson sent Bowell on a trade mission to Australia, where he worked to set up a cable network connecting the colonies. When Bowell returned to Canada, he organized the first conference of British colonies in Ottawa. This was perhaps the greatest achievement of Bowell's political career. Bowell was 71 years old, referred to by fellow cabinet members as Grandpa Bowell, not necessarily affectionately, and at the height of his potential and ability. Since 1893, Bowell had served as leader of the government in the Senate and was the most senior member of Thompson's cabinet. When Thompson went to Europe, Bowell was left in temporary command. On December 12, 1894, when Sir John Thompson suddenly died, Mackenzie Bowell was in the spotlight. On December 21, 1894, the Governor-General, Lord Aberdeen, settled on Mackenzie Bowell as Prime Minister. There were other ministers who wanted the job, and many would have preferred Charles Tupper, but Bowell got the promotion, becoming the second and final Prime Minister to serve from the Senate. Canada in the early 1890s was changing quickly. The country was becoming increasingly industrialized, and because it was harder and more expensive to travel long distances, many people began living in crowded conditions around the factories where they worked. People worked long hours in dangerous conditions, but hey, products were cheaper than ever. James Naismith invented basketball in 1892 outside of Ottawa, and in 1893, the Governor-General at the time, Lord Stanley, purchased what would become hockey's most coveted cup and awarded it to the Montreal Hockey Club. In 1895, Niagara Falls was used to generate hydroelectricity. Cities and towns were growing. Toronto's population doubled in 10 years to over 180,000, but Montreal remained the biggest city in Canada. And people were still flooding to the west. There were endless fields of gold and wheat to be exported, and one other thing caught people's eyes: gold. The Klondike Gold Rush of 1896 drew thousands of people to the Yukon Territory in northwest Canada. By 1898, Dawson City was the largest city west of Winnipeg. Speaking of Winnipeg, we've been referencing the Manitoba schools question for the past several videos, and now is finally the time that it really blows up. So first, a little background. After negotiations with Louis Riel, the Manitoba Act was signed in 1870, and Manitoba became the first Western province to join Canada. Language and religious rights were at the heart of the Manitoba Act. Riel wanted to ensure equal rights for French Catholics. The Manitoba Act was supposed to ensure funding for both Catholic schools and Protestant schools, and that French remained an official language in the province. As time went on, though, a few factors came into play. Settlers from Ontario were moving to Manitoba in larger and larger numbers, and many Métis were leaving. French and English populations had once been roughly equal, but now English was increasingly becoming the primary spoken language in the province, just as Protestantism was becoming the primary religion. In 1890, the Manitoba government made it so that French Catholics would have to pay taxes supporting public schools and pay separately to send their children to Catholic schools. The Supreme Court of Canada and the Privy Council in England had contradictory rulings, and the issue wasn't being resolved. There was a lot tied up in the Manitoba schools question, and much of it fell on Bowell's lap. His parliament had to do something. The problem was that choosing one side would alienate the other. The Manitoba schools question had effectively clogged the House of Commons. Nothing was getting done, and Bowell couldn't make up his mind. Even worse for Bowell, because he was part of the Senate, he wasn't able to participate in the debates in the House of Commons, nor did he have any allies to argue on his behalf. This went on for months. So eventually, Bowell did what he thought he had to. He went against his personal beliefs and against the stance he'd held for years as a prominent Orangeman. He sided with the French Catholic minority. At the very least, Bowell thought, he should get Laurier's support on this. But Wilfrid Laurier was a much smarter man and a far better politician than poor Grandpa Bowell. Laurier stayed quiet on the matter, watching from the safety of his Quebec riding as the sharks circled Bowell's sinking conservative ship. Charles Tupper's son, Charles Hibbert Tupper, was Minister of Justice under Mackenzie Bowell. He and another cabinet member had been watching Mackenzie Bowell putter around doing a whole lot of nothing for too long. They had had enough of Bowell's indecisiveness and overall ineffectiveness, so they organized a revolt. 7 ministers suddenly resigned from their cabinet positions and demanded that Bowell step down as prime minister. Bowell, they declared, was too incompetent to lead. They wanted Charles Tupper. The 7 mutinying ministers stormed the train station in Ottawa, where they ensured Bowell could not send for any replacements. This was a crisis. Bowell conceded defeat. He was forced to quit by his own cabinet.
"A nest of traitors,"
as he famously called them. Bowell would remain in office until April, at which point Charles Tupper would become prime minister and lead the Conservatives as they prepared for the upcoming June 1896 election. Despite Mackenzie Bowell's explosive exit, he continued to serve on the Senate for the rest of his life. He died in Belleville in 1917, 21 years after his 16 months as PM, at the age of 94. Notably, no elected officials, current or former, attended his funeral. History has not been kind to Sir Mackenzie Bowell, though it should be noted that Bowell was not very kind himself. He had a fierce temper and little control of his tongue. He was easily provoked into an incoherent rage. He could not be more different than Sir John Thompson before him. Regarding Ukrainians, Bowell said,
"One look at the disgusting creatures has caused many to marvel that human form could have sunk to such a bestial level."
To Bowell's credit, he was willing to go against his personal prejudices for what he believed was best for the people in Manitoba. There is one thing that Bowell gave Canada that no one else could. Alexander Mackenzie tried, but with wispy results. Bowell is the last of his kind in the history of Canadian prime ministers. Sir Mackenzie Bowell may be considered second worst on the Maclean's prime minister rankings, but he got first on their list of facial hair, which is no small victory for no great man. Do extreme views help or hinder you in politics? To what extent did Bowell's extreme views affect his time as prime minister?